Hey, look, I totally get it. You're upset, but we're all trying to move on here. Why don't you do me a favor and just go ahead and wipe that video? Nobody needs to see it, right?
No, I have every right to record.
Listen, I'm trying to help you out. Delete it or this gets a whole lot harder for you.
I'm not covering anything up. You stepped out of line. People are going to know.
Officer Charles William understood his partner had crossed a serious line. He knew the way the teenager was arrested looked terrible, but rather than report it, he chose to hide the truth. He pulled aside the only witness, Eivelyn Brooks, and tried to pressure her into deleting the video she had filmed. He believed he was fixing the situation. He didn't realize his own body camera was capturing a crime, threatening a witness. What you watched was an officer trying to wipe away the truth, a quiet but threatening effort to shut down someone who saw what happened. You saw their tense exchange. Now we're going to share the entire story and explain how Eivelyn's courage to resist changed a young boy's life and brought an end to a dishonest officer's career. If you think the truth is important, make sure to subscribe. To see what led up to that cold Chicago moment, we must go back 30 minutes earlier. Eivelyn Brooks was heading home from the library, her backpack weighed down with textbooks and notes for her sociology thesis. At 28, she was in her last year of graduate school, focused on criminal justice reform and community policing. The irony of what she was about to see would not be lost on her. The dull gray February sky hung low above the neighborhood, and Eivelyn pulled her coat closer as she walked onto a familiar residential block bordered with red brick homes. She was thinking about her thesis deadline, about the interview she had set for the coming week with a local organizer. She was thinking about ordinary things. She had no idea that within minutes she would step into the very subject she'd been researching. That's when she heard the yelling. 2 police officers had a teenage boy pinned against a parked vehicle. The kid couldn't have been older than 16. He was tall and thin, wearing a school hoodie and jeans that sagged loosely on his body. His hands were already secured behind him, but one officer kept pressing his face harder against the cold metal. The other officer was shouting at him to stop resisting, though from where Eivelyn stood, the boy didn't seem to move at all. He was frozen with fear. Eivelyn slowed her steps, her heartbeat picking up. She had studied moments like this in her research. She had spoken with people who had seen police force firsthand, but watching it happen live just 40 feet away was something else entirely. The officer's knee pushed into the back of the teenager's legs, driving him down toward the ground. The boy cried out, "I wasn't doing anything." The teenager's voice cracked with fear and hurt. "Be quiet," the officer snapped. "You ran from us." "I didn't run, I was just walking." Eivelyn's hand shifted to her pocket. She took out her phone. Her fingers trembled, but she opened the camera and started to record. She held the phone at her chest, trying to stay subtle, yet making sure the lens could see what was happening. Through her screen, she watched the officer twist the boy's arm behind his back at a position that made her wince. She saw him push his knee into the teenager's spine. She watched the boy's face tighten in pain as he was pressed even harder against the ground. This was excessive. This was exactly what her research had outlined, what the community members she'd spoken to had described. And now, she was seeing it, and she was filming it. And her whole body surged with adrenaline, fear, and an unexpected sense of responsibility. The arrest went on for another 90 seconds. The officers finally hauled the teenager upright and led him toward their patrol car. His face was scraped from being dragged across the pavement. There was blood on his cheek. He was crying quietly, and Eivelyn could see the shame and fear in his eyes as they placed him in the back of the police car. She ended the recording. Her hands were shaking so hard she almost dropped her phone. She glanced down at the screen. The video was saved. 3 minutes and 47 seconds. Clear footage, solid proof. She quickly uploaded it to her cloud storage as an extra backup. Some instinct told her to protect it right away. That's when she realized one of the officers was staring at her. Officer Charles William had been the one standing aside during the arrest. He was in his 40s, with gray streaks at his temples and the posture of someone who'd been in the job for many years. He hadn't been the one with his knee in the back, but he had been right there. He had watched it all unfold. He hadn't done a thing to stop it. And now, as his partner sat in the driver's seat of the patrol car filling out paperwork, William's eyes were locked on Eivelyn. He said something to his partner, then stepped away from the vehicle. He started walking toward her. Eivelyn's first instinct was to run. Every nerve in her body urged her to turn and leave fast, but her feet wouldn't obey. She stood on the sidewalk, her phone still gripped tightly in her hand, her back mere inches from the red brick wall of an apartment. She watched the officer draw closer and knew exactly what was coming. Officer Williams' body camera was active. It had been recording through the entire arrest. It was still running as he crossed the street toward the young woman who had just filmed his partner beating a teenager. The camera was attached to his uniform, angled to capture everything from his point of view. It clearly showed Eivelyn's face as he got closer. It showed the fear in her eyes. It would record every single word that followed. William stopped around 3 feet away from her, close enough to intimidate, close enough that his presence, his uniform, the gun at his hip, all sent an unspoken warning, but not so close that it would appear threatening on camera. He was seasoned. He knew how to control a situation. He knew how to handle a witness. He believed he was in charge. "Hey, look, I totally understand," William said, his voice calm and measured. There was an almost friendly edge to his tone, like he was a reasonable man trying to have a reasonable conversation. "You're upset, but we're all trying to move past this. Why don't you do me a favor and just delete that video? No one needs to see it, right?" The request sounded casual, like he was asking her to hold a door or pick up trash. But Eivelyn heard the steel behind the words. This wasn't a favor. This was a command in disguise. An armed officer was telling her to erase evidence. Her throat was dry. Her heart pounded in her chest. But something inside her, a mix of her research, her principles, and her sense of right, made her shake her head. "No," she said. Her voice was softer than she wanted, but steady. "I have every right to record." William's expression changed. The friendly mask slipped just a bit. His jaw tightened. He stepped a half-pace closer. Now he was definitely in her space. His hand moved in a gesture that might have looked casual, but it drew her eyes to his belt, to the gear, the gun, the handcuffs, the radio he could use to call backup. "Listen," he said, and now the act of friendliness was gone. His tone was sharper, more commanding. "I'm trying to help you out. Delete it, or this becomes a whole lot worse for you." There it was. The threat uncovered. Obey or face the fallout. Eivelyn felt her heartbeat thudding in her throat. She was a graduate student, maybe 130 pounds at most. This man was a trained officer with weapons and the full force of the state behind him. He could arrest her right now. He could claim she was interfering with police work. He could take her phone. He could do countless things to her. And who would stop him? His partner? His partner had just smashed a teenager's face into the pavement. But Eivelyn also knew her rights. She had studied them. She had written entire papers on them. The First Amendment protected her ability to record police officers doing their jobs in public. Multiple court rulings had backed this. She was on a public sidewalk. She hadn't disrupted the arrest. She had only watched. She saw. And now an officer was directly ordering her to destroy that evidence. She tightened her grip on her phone. She felt the brick wall behind her, solid and cold. She had no escape, but she wasn't going to fold. "I'm not hiding anything," Eivelyn said, and this time her voice was firmer. There was anger in it now, mixed with fear. "You crossed a line. People are going to find out." The words hung in the cold February air between them. Officer Williams stared at her, and Eivelyn could see him thinking. She could see him measuring his choices. He towered over her now, using his height to intimidate. His stance was forceful, dominant. He was trying to crush her resolve without ever touching her. "You don't understand the spot you're in," he said quietly. "I could come up with a dozen reasons to arrest you right now. Public disturbance, interference. I'm sure we'd find something in that bag of yours if we checked. You really want to risk all that over a video?" It was a blatant threat. He was telling her he would invent charges if she didn't obey. He was telling her he had the power to wreck her life. And he was right. He did have that power. Police officers had huge discretion over who they stopped, who they searched, who they arrested. and Eivelyn was a black woman alone on a street with two officers who had already shown they were willing to use excessive force. But she also knew something Officer William didn't fully realize. She knew his body camera was recording every second of this conversation. She knew that every threat he made, every word he used to intimidate her, was being documented. He thought he was fixing a problem. He thought he was protecting his partner and controlling a witness. He didn't see that he was creating proof of a crime. Eivelyn's hand moved instinctively to shield her phone, holding it tight against her chest. "I'm not deleting anything," she said. William stared at her for a long beat. Eivelyn could see the frustration written clearly in his eyes. He had expected her to give in. Most people would have. Most people, when faced with an angry officer making threats, would do whatever it took to end the situation and leave safely. But Eivelyn wasn't backing down, and William could see it. He stepped back, but his eyes never left her face. "You're making a mistake," he said. It wasn't quite a threat anymore. It sounded more like a warning, as if he was genuinely concerned about what could happen to her for refusing. But beneath it was still that edge of danger, the unspoken message that trouble came to those who didn't obey the police. "I don't think I am," Eivelyn replied. William studied her for a few more seconds, then shook his head slowly. "Have it your way," he said. He turned and walked back to the patrol car, where his partner was still sitting with the teenager in the back seat. Eivelyn watched him leave. Her legs were trembling. Her whole body was buzzing with adrenaline. She had just stood up to an officer who had openly threatened her. She had refused to delete evidence of police brutality. And now he was walking away, and she was still standing, unarrested. But she also knew this wasn't over. Once Officer William returned to the patrol car, Eivelyn turned and hurried in the opposite direction. Her hands were still shaking as she opened her cloud storage to make sure the video had uploaded. It had. She opened her email and sent the video to herself as an extra backup. Then she opened her contacts, found her best friend's number, and called, leaving a voicemail explaining what had happened, where she was, and what she had recorded. If anything had happened to her, she wanted someone to know. When she arrived home 20 minutes later, she locked the door and sat on her couch, letting herself finally feel the full impact of what had just occurred. She had seen police brutality. She had recorded it. She had been threatened and intimidated by an officer trying to make her erase the evidence, and she had refused. Now she had to figure out her next steps. Eivelyn spent an hour researching. She looked up local civil rights attorneys. She found the website for a civilian police accountability group in Chicago. She read articles about similar incidents. Then, after gathering her courage and finishing her research, she sat at her laptop and began uploading the video. She posted it to 3 different platforms. She wrote a clear, factual caption explaining exactly what she had seen, including the date, time, location, and a description of the excessive force she had filmed. She didn't adulterize or use inflammatory language. She simply stated the facts. Then she tagged local news stations, civil rights groups, and police accountability organizations, and hit post. The video began spreading almost immediately. Within 2 hours, it had been shared hundreds of times. Within 4 hours, a local news station contacted Eivelyn for an interview. By that evening, regional outlets had picked it up. By the next morning, it had become a national story. The footage was clear and undeniable. It showed officers using excessive force on a teenager who wasn't resisting arrest. It showed a boy being attacked for no clear reason. Then something happened that Officer Charles William hadn't expected. The police department, reacting to the public outcry over Eivelyn's video, released the body camera footage from the arrest, standard procedure for high-profile cases. They released footage from both officers' cameras, which included Officer Williams' body cam, meaning they released the video of Williams' conversation with Eivelyn. The full recording showed him approaching a witness, noting that she had filmed the arrest, and explicitly telling her to delete the video. It showed him making threats when she refused. It showed him looming over her, using his presence to intimidate. It showed him implying he could create charges against her if she didn't obey. Everything was there, captured on his own camera in his own words. The arrest footage was damaging for William's partner, but the body cam of William trying to bully Eivelyn into destroying evidence was disastrous for him personally. The story went viral. News outlets that had been reporting on the excessive force arrest now had a second, equally compelling story. A police officer caught on his own body cam trying to obstruct justice and intimidate a witness. Legal experts appeared on TV, explaining that Williams' actions could amount to multiple crimes, including witness tampering and obstruction of justice. Civil rights groups highlighted the video as a clear example of why the right to record police is so important, and why police intimidation of witnesses is a serious problem. For the teenager who had been arrested, Eivelyn's video changed everything. The charges against him, including resisting arrest and assaulting an officer, were dropped within 48 hours. The video proved he had not resisted and posed no threat. He was released. His public defender filed a formal complaint against the officers involved and began exploring a civil rights lawsuit. The boy's face had been scraped, and he would carry scars, but he would not lose his future because of a lie. His family released a statement thanking Eivelyn for her bravery in recording the incident and refusing to delete the evidence. For the officer who actually committed the assault, Williams' partner, the consequences were severe. He was placed on immediate administrative leave. The department launched an internal affairs probe into his use of force. The local prosecutor's office started reviewing the case for potential criminal charges. His career in the department, and possibly his freedom, was now at risk, all because Eivelyn had refused to delete a video. But for Officer Charles William, the consequences were even more immediate and serious. Within 72 hours of the BodyCam footage being released, he was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The charges being considered were serious: obstruction of justice, witness tampering, and official misconduct. These weren't just departmental violations, these were felonies. He had used his role as a police officer to try to erase evidence of a crime. He had threatened a civilian to make her destroy proof of police misconduct. And he had done it all while wearing a body cam that recorded every word. The police union initially tried to defend him, claiming he was only trying to calm a tense situation and that his words had been misunderstood. But the video left no doubt. There was no ambiguity in what he had said or done. He had explicitly told Eivelyn to delete the video, and he had explicitly threatened her when she refused. 1 week after the incident, Officer Charles William was fired from the Chicago Police Department. The termination letter cited gross misconduct, violations of departmental rules, and conduct unbecoming an officer. His personnel file, made public as part of the investigation, showed this wasn't his first offense. There had been prior complaints, there had been warnings, but nothing had ever been so clear or so fully documented. 2 weeks after his firing, the county prosecutor announced criminal charges against William. He was charged with witness intimidation and official misconduct. If found guilty, he could face up to 3 years in prison. His trial was scheduled for the following summer. The officer who had actually committed the assault was also fired and charged with battery and excessive force. But in the media, it was Williams' case that drew the most attention, because his crime was the cover-up. It was the act of trying to erase the truth, and he had been caught doing it on his own body cam. Eivelyn watched all of this unfold from her small apartment. She gave interviews to news outlets explaining why she decided to record and why she had refused to delete the video. She spoke about the importance of civilian oversight and the right to record police activity in public. She talked about how scared she had been, but how she knew deleting the video would have been wrong. For a short time, she became a symbol. Civil rights groups invited her to speak. Police accountability organizations pointed to her case as proof of why laws against witness intimidation needed to be stronger. Law professors used the video in classes to illustrate Fourth Amendment rights and the value of recording public officials. But Eivelyn didn't see herself as a symbol. She saw herself as someone who had done what was necessary. She thought about the teenager whose future might have been ruined if she had deleted the video. She thought about all the other incidents that might still be happening where there was no video, no witness, no evidence. 3 months after the incident, Eivelyn sat in her apartment watching the evening news. The lead story was Officer Charles Williams' arraignment. He pled not guilty to the charges, though his attorney had suggested they might consider a plea deal. The news showed footage of him leaving the courthouse, face set and angry, his life unraveling because he had tried to intimidate one witness into deleting one video. The next story focused on the teenager. He was back in school, doing well. His family had filed a civil lawsuit against the city and the police department, and it looked likely to settle for a substantial amount. He had a future again. Eivelyn turned off the television and sat quietly in her apartment. She thought back to that cold February afternoon. She remembered the moment Officer William had approached her, when she had been pressed against the brick wall, when every instinct screamed at her to give in and make the threat disappear. She thought about how easy it would have been to delete the video. Just a few taps on her phone and the whole confrontation would have ended. She could have walked away. She would have been safe. But the teenager wouldn't have been safe. He would have been convicted on false charges. He would have had a record. His life would have been changed by a lie that no one challenged. Officer William would have continued doing what he had likely done for years, protecting bad cops, intimidating witnesses, erasing evidence, and making sure the truth stayed hidden. Because that was what the confrontation had really been about. It wasn't just about one video or one arrest. It was about a system where some officers believed they could act without consequences, where they could use excessive force, silence witnesses, erase evidence, and face no accountability. Eivelyn had refused to be part of that system. She had refused to be intimidated. She had refused to delete the video. And because of that refusal, because of her bravery in that moment of fear, a teenager's life had been protected, and a corrupt officer's career had ended. The right to record police officers in public is one of the most important rights citizens have. It is the safeguard against abuse of power. It is the proof that makes accountability possible. And it only works if people are willing to use that right, even when it's scary, even when an armed officer is looming over them, demanding they erase what they've captured. Eivelyn Brooks had used that right. She had stood on a Chicago sidewalk with her back against a brick wall. She had looked at a police officer who was threatening her and said no. She had said people would know. She had refused to hide the truth. And because she didn't delete it, justice became possible. That is the lesson of this story. Not that all police officers are corrupt, not that the system is hopeless, but that accountability needs evidence. Evidence needs witnesses, and witnesses need courage. It takes people like Eivelyn who, in a moment of fear and pressure, choose to do the right thing, even when it would be much easier to do nothing. Officer Charles William thought he was solving a problem when he approached Eivelyn that day. He thought he was controlling the situation, protecting his partner, managing the story. He believed he had the power to make a witness comply, to erase evidence, to make sure his version of events was the only one that mattered. He was wrong, because his own body cam had captured everything, because Eivelyn refused to be intimidated, because once the truth is recorded, it is very hard to erase. And now, 3 months later, William was facing criminal charges, his partner was fired and awaiting trial, the teenager was back in school with his future intact, and Eivelyn had returned to her research, her thesis, her normal life. But she carried the knowledge that she had made a difference, that when it mattered most, when the pressure was at its peak, she had stood firm. The video is still online. Millions of people have watched it. Some see it as evidence of police brutality. Some see it as proof of a corrupt cover-up. Some see it as a reminder that the right to record is essential and must be protected. Eivelyn sees it as a reminder that ordinary people can hold extraordinary power when they refuse to look away, refuse to silence, and refuse to let the truth be erased. She sees it as proof that courage isn't about being unafraid. It's about being terrified and doing the right thing anyway. On that cold February afternoon, with an officer looming over her and threatening her, every nerve in her body screaming to comply and escape, Eivelyn Brooks chose courage, chose truth. She chose to believe that the video in her hand mattered more than her immediate safety, that the teenager's future mattered more than her own fear. And she was right. Because she didn't delete it, a boy got his life back. Because she didn't delete it, a corrupt officer faced justice. Because she didn't delete it, the system was forced to confront what it would have preferred to ignore. That's the power of.
That's the power of refusing to be silent. That's the power of knowing your rights and using them, even when doing so is frightening and difficult. Officer William learned that lesson the hard way. He learned that in a world full of cameras, body cams, and viral videos, the truth is much harder to hide than it used to be. He learned that intimidating witnesses is a crime, not a solution. He learned that the body cam on his own uniform could be the tool that ends his career. But more importantly, people watching this story learn a different lesson. They learn that the right to record police is real and protected. They learned that officers who try to bully witnesses into deleting evidence can face serious consequences. They learned that standing up for the truth, even when it's frightening, even when facing an armed officer who is threatening you, is both possible and necessary. Eivelyn Brooks isn't a hero in the usual sense. She didn't plan to be in that situation. She didn't seek out a confrontation with the police. She was just a graduate student walking home who happened to witness something wrong and made the choice to record it. And then, when pressured to erase what she had seen, she made the harder choice to refuse. But by making those choices, in those moments of courage, she changed lives. She saved a teenager's future. She exposed a corrupt system. She proved that ordinary citizens have the power to hold those in authority accountable when they are willing to use their rights and stand by their principles. So if there's one thing to take from this story, let it be this. The next time you see something wrong, document it. The next time someone in power tries to scare you into silence, refuse. The next time you're told to delete the truth, say no. Because the truth matters, evidence matters, witnesses matter, and your courage in that critical moment can change everything. Officer Charles William thought he could erase the truth. Eivelyn Brooks proved him wrong. And in doing so, she reminded us all that justice is possible, but only when people refuse to look away.